Hey guys, so today I want to show you this Discord extension for the Pycord library. And essentially, if you can see here, it's an extension for internationalization, and what that means, I'll explain later. The basic concept of the extension is that you'll be able to translate the bot interface. That includes all these things that's written here. So there are messages, interaction messages, embeds, buttons, selects, modals, and webhooks. So these are things that you certainly have as an interface to the user. So when the user interacts with your bot, they see these messages, they see these buttons, and sometimes perhaps you'll have a dashboard, and usually there are very strong IATN or internalization libraries that supports websites. And this specific extension is to support internalization within the bot interfaces. So um, let's get right into it. And before you run this code that I'm going to show you, you'll want to install this extension. And if you want to get back on how to install this, it's in the README for the repository, and it's called. This is the link. I'll put it down below in the description. The first thing you'll notice, if you've used Pycord before, you'll know a lot of these things, and if you are quite well versed in Pycord, you'll almost know every single thing here. But we'll go through this line by line. So these are just simple imports, and I'm only importing getenv and load.env because I'm using an environment, environment for my token, because I really do not want to leak my token. And if you look at it here, you don't really need it. So if you're not using an env, don't import it. It's the basic stuff. And here, this is an important part. Usually, you would simply just import these two, but in this example that I'm going to show you, you'll need to import these three classes as well, and I'm going to show you why. First thing, we make the intents. We make it from the default intents, and then enable message and message contents. It's not particularly necessary for the extension, but it's enabled only for the sake of message commands. And then we make the bot class, and then we assign a preferences dictionary to the bot instance. And then, this is very important, we'll instantiate an agent class with the, as you can see, the argument here called translate all. Now if you hover over the agent class, you'll see that it takes some parameters like translate x, and by translate x it means translate messages, translate embeds, translate anything. So if you want to translate messages, you'd likely put translate messages equals true, and this will tell the translation agent that you want to translate messages when they go out. But if you don't, you just have to remove that. And by default, translate messages is true and everything else is false. So if you literally don't add anything here, it will just translate the messages and ignore all other things. But I don't want that to happen. I want the bot to translate everything, and by everything, it's all these values specified here. And it should only be specified, instantiated once. That's very important. And then the second thing, because this is a translation agent, and from the way it's built, so I'll try to build the foundations for what it's actually doing. And so when a user sends a, let's say, when a user uses a command, let's say that's /help, the bot sends a message, right? And where that message gets sent to is dependent on where the command is called. It could be dependent on a lot of things, but the main idea here is that the translation agent is wrapped around the destination of the message. What does that mean? Well, that means if I'm using the help command in this server, we can make it so that this server, any messages that get sent to this server is translated to a specific dialect of a language. And if it's, let's say, we can also segregate them by terms of channel or user. So if, let's say, the command is being used by Neo, it's going to be translated into, let's say, Spanish. If it's used by some other person like Morpheus, it will be translated into Arabic, or I don't know, some other language, Swahili, something like that. And these are attached to the destination of where the message is getting sent to. So that's, I suppose that's the useful part, I would say, because usually what you want to deal with internalization is that internalize your bot interfaces to the language preference of the server that the bot is operating in, or the person, or the channel. So these are three options that you can choose from. And if you when you want, if you to set that up, we have this preference dictionary, and what that preference dictionary does is that it stores all the channel to language preference mappings. And these mappings, we see here that this is a getLang function, and it's decorated using the detector langGetter. So you need to decorate any function that is supposed to act as a language getter function. So this function is called internally to detect the language preferences. So an ID, that ID could be a channel, a guild, or a user. This function has to return a preference for that ID. If it does not have any, you can just return none. This is very important. You have to decorate this with langGetter. And then here is the language setting function. So what is it? It sets a language. So here you can see that using a lang code, and the lang code, we construct it into a language enum. And if the lang code does not exist, we'll just return bad code subs, basic Python. And if the lang is English, because the bot is already English, we'll just remove their preference. Because if they're using the default language as a specified preference, it just means that they don't have a preference in terms of this logic. And for the fourth one, we'll just set the channel ID to the lang. So the important thing here is that it is the channel ID that the language is being set to. And if you see here, this function will be called with the channel ID, and when it's called, it gets the preference from the preference dict, and it is the exact same dict that we are setting here. And then we'll just send a little reply. That's pretty much it. And then this hi command is just like any command that you would have. Here, the very important part of it is that this is actually just the way it is by default. So that means that when you install the extension, you don't have to change anything at all to your language, to your interfacing commands, or interfacing, I would say, methods. So the interfacing methods, by which I mean reply, send, respond, and all that sorts of methods, you don't need to change any one of them in any aspect. And the the extension will simply just recognize where they're being used and translate them based on how they're being used. And once the bot is ready, awesome. And here we will see that this is the bot that we've just logged into. And now let's try to use the hi command. So you can see here it's just replies with hi. There's nothing special about that. And we can try the lang command here. And if we try the lang command, you'll see that the lang code is missing. We didn't pass in the parameter. Let's pass in a parameter. So if it's English, we can pass in en. And how do I know that that's the language code? You can search it up on Google. There are specific language codes attached to specific languages. So that's for English. And let's say that I don't speak English and I speak some other language, like Myanmar or Burmese. And in that case, I'll change the language to language MY. And MY is the language code for Myanmar or Burmese. And you can see here that it actually changed it. It actually sets the language first here, and it actually sends back the message in the designated language, which is Myanmar, and I can read Myanmar, so this is quite correct. And you'll notice, how is this happening? Like, how is that? So when we use this command language.my, the bot sets the preferences here, and then when the bot wants to reply on line 45, it will call this function and see if this channel that it's sending to, that it's replying to, has a preference. Since we've already set that in line 43, it does have a preference, and that preference gets implemented and translated directly here, as we can see. And the other thing is also that we can use the hi command, and look, you see hey gets translated to hey. So this is how you pronounce that in Burmese, and that's the sort of implementation that the extension provides. It's quite interesting because you don't have to change the code, you don't have to change a lot. You just have to add this getLang function with the preference, and you have to make a language setter function. And if you want to wrap this around some sort of like an ASQLite database, you can do that. And I'm planning to make an example on that, but this is just a basic get started example. And if we go to another channel, and let's actually give the permission, the bot to the, and we can try hi here, and you'll see that it's actually in English because the preference is not tied to anything but the channel. So this channel pronounces the words or translates the interface message in Myanmar. this one interfaces in English. And you can actually, let's say I want to have this in Spanish, de Española. And we can see here that it turns into Spanish immediately. And you can press in high, it will be in Spanish. I don't know what "hoy" means, but maybe it's something to do with "hey" in Spanish. And you see it's still completely functional, just dependent on where the message is being sent to. And that determines the language of the interface message. So I hope you understand the sort of gist of what that means. If you want to get further into it, there's an entire repository. There are many examples, and you can surf through the code if you want to yourself. And lastly, before we move on, I want to say that here you can importantly here you see the you can return none if you want to. That's permissible. That's the first thing, might be confusing. And the second thing is line code from code. So if we go to the definition here, we'll see that it comes from the constants here. So if you want to know the language code of a specific language, you can always come and look inside the constants. Okay, moving on, we have this other file called all objects. So all objects is a simple Pycord implementation of a bot. It has the same getLang function, just without the documentation. It uses the same preferences dict and the same language setter. The important thing here is that inside the all objects we have this set command, and this set command, if you go through this, we can provide an option and a state. So the state must be either true or false. If it's not, we'll just reply it's not a valid state and so on. And if it is, we will reply change state. Now, importantly, this just turns the text into a permissible Boolean format. And the thing is, we will change the option. If the option is message, we'll change the translate message quark or static property to true. So what is this? What is all of this? Well, you see that in the agent class, we have the static properties here. Translate message, translate embeds, translate buttons, translate select, and translate modal. And you can change that anytime throughout the bot's lifetime, and you can have that affect how the things get translated. So this is changing the language configuration on runtime. This is so it doesn't matter what you put in here, because if you look at the init function for the agent, it actually simply just sets the agent static property. The arguments just simply set the static property of agent. So it's very similar. It's almost the same with just doing this. So that's one thing we've added. We have in this object file. And second thing is we have a random function that returns a random number. Importantly, you see that here we use a random digit reply. So quite importantly, when you reply strings that are prone to change, so in this case, you don't really know what this number is going to be. So if you were to translate on each random iteration of the message, let it be 0, 1, 9, 10, 11, any number, you are going to suffer from a performance dip, because you have to keep on translating the number over and over and over again. And how do you avoid that? Well, there's an in-depth guide on avoiding specific translations for phrases, for snippets, and you can see that in optimized. I'm not going to get into this example now, but it should explain to you how you can avoid the translation of a specific part of a string. And you see that it relies on having wrapped around by 0 with white spaces. So these characters will not be sent or displayed when you actually send the message. It just acts as a delimiter so that the extension knows to not translate this. So when the extension ignores the translation for this, it only needs to translate this once and ignore this part. So that's going to be a little bit optimized and useful. We have the high command here. We have it also in the slash command form, and the rest is just implementing all the objects that the extension supports the translation of. So everything I've made an example of here, and let's try to run this and try to see. We'll use the high command as usual, because we do have a high command here, and it just replies with hey. It's very simple, and we can also use the slash command, I suppose. The slash command might actually be a problem with the okay. So this is a little issue that Discord's been having for a while, where if you render or register such commands, they actually don't go through. You have to sort of like refresh them, like I did before. Okay, awesome. And so if you see here, hi, it's the same thing, and embed just sends an example embed what is discord.ext.it. ITN is a program that does automatic translation with no code change necessary for the bot. And see here it says language none. And we also have a view. And that view, are you a human being? What fruits do human beings eat? Maybe oranges, maybe bananas. And very good. That's what I like to say. Nice. Okay, and so continuing on, we also have a model. Just say the exact. I believe this is the exact example from the Pycord examples directory. Just say sample little model. Now let's set a language to my. Why not? And here you see that this is a little bit faster than when I did initially, and that's because I want to point out because it actually caches the translations here. You can't actually see it, but it actually caches translation here. So this part of the phrase is translated in terms of the language code MY into this Unicode string. In Española, we have this string, and for Myanmar, this is a word Burmese, and all this is cached. So it only needs to translate once if it's already been translated. And now the interesting part is, let's say we use hi command. We know that works. Let's try with the slash command. And it still works. The only difference between the slash command and the message command is that it uses a different interfacing method, and the interface method is respond, and the extension actually covers that message. So we're good to go. And then how about an embed? Wouldn't it be interesting if the entire embed is translated to our needs? Well, that's exactly what it does. It translates, if you look here, all this text into its Burmese equivalent, or by Burmese I mean Myanmar. It's a different interchangeable word for the language Myanmar. But you see here that it actually changes the entire embed into the language. And you see it doesn't translate this. And why not? Because, surprise, surprise, it is a, where do I? Because it is, create embed, let me go there. Because it is wrapped inside the same white space character. If we had removed this, it is going to attempt to translate this, and that's no good, because this is her name, and we don't want that to be translated. So we want that to be in English. That's the useful part. And we don't translate the footer. How do we know that? Because we see that in the set footer function, we actually passes it with the delimiter, and so it doesn't translate the text in the footer. Now let's use embeds. Embeds is just multiple embeds just to demonstrate that the bot also translates if you send multiple embeds at the same time. And the second to last thing is the view. So the view, interestingly, since we've enabled translate all, it actually translates everything. Like it translates this text that you would see. Are you a human being? The equivalent in Burmese is that's the equivalent. And then then these are the yes and no equivalent of Burmese. And then all these are still translated. And you'll see that certain parts, this is not translated and this is not translated. That's not a bug. It's actually because I wanted to demonstrate a key component here, is that you can actually selectively remove the translations from certain buttons, certain labels, certain selection options by starting with the delimiter, the white space, the zero width white space character. So any phrase that starts with this will actually be ignored. So you can see here, and we can still select it. We can select the Burmese equivalent. We can select anything at all. And finally, the and if you have a response message like this, it also gets translated. It's no, to be precise. And the last thing we have is the modal. So this is currently in beta. It's quite problematic so far because when we use the modal command, the bot actually takes a while to translate the text. Here it sort of works, but most of the time you'll see the modal being too delayed to be sent. And what happens is that an interaction, an unknown interaction error will get thrown out because it took too long to send the mode out. That's what happens most of the time. But here it sort of worked, and you can see here that these are all the Burmese equivalent of the text we used to have here, just as usual. And so that has been it. I hope you will find this Pycord extension useful. And before we go, I just want to say one thing. There are many more examples that you should look into here, and by default, the translation happens through Google Translate. So that's important to keep in mind. If you want to use any other translations, any of the translators, you can see the examples here that lets you do that. So that has been it. Thank you very much.